My name is John Towsley, and I will be hosting today. I am one of the co-founders of BWise Group of Companies and the CEO of MindMuse, which is our e-learning business. I have known Bob for, I'm not so sure how many years, actually. I was trying to think, Bob. I think probably the first time we met, although I don't really remember it. I think we were both there. Was a conference in Miami in the year 1989. So that maybe dates both of us. But anyways, I remember your old company being there, and I'm pretty sure you were there too. Bob's been an active and influential leader in leading the training industry for more than 25 years, so that makes sense. He's renowned worldwide for his pioneering role in e-learning, new approaches to learning, and Bob joined Ontuitive from Microsoft, where he was the Director of Learning Strategy and Evangelism. Bob is an influential voice in the IT training industry. He speaks at conferences and participates with industry associations such as the Chief Learning Officer Magazine, CompTIA, ASTD, the Learning Guild, and Maisie Center. We're pleased to have Bob today on our show, and he will be discussing the importance of learning at the moment of need and the shift to performance support. For those of you who haven't been invited yet or didn't know, Bob will be in Toronto next month speaking at an event that MindMuse and ThoughtRock are hosting together. So if you're in the Toronto area or find a cheap flight, come on up and see Bob speak live. We'll have some more information about that at the end of today's webcast so you can get all the details. With that, I will be quiet and turn things over to Bob.
Great, John. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. So glad to have you here. Appreciate you taking your lunch hour or thereabouts to join us today. I want to thank the BWise folks and group for inviting me in. As you see, again, to John's point, love to make this as interactive as possible. I know we have the lines muted for logistic issues and such, but by all means, please use the chat, and John has complete rights and privileges to interrupt throughout. I'd love to get to your questions in context, so let me know how that's going. There you see my name on the screen there, folks, and the book that I wrote with a dear colleague of mine, Dr. Conrad Gottfredson, a year or so back, and of course the corresponding title around performance support. Really an interesting discovery for me in my life professionally, guys. I mean, I've been in this business for 30 years, actually, as of September of this year. Started out teaching 8-year-olds in primary school up here. Down here, I should say, in the States. I'm just across the lake from you folks, or from many of you here in Rochester, New York. But the interesting thing is I didn't stumble back on this discipline until about 6 years ago. You know, performance support first entered our industry back in the 80s with a wonderful lady named Gloria Geary, G-E-R-Y. Highly recommend you read Gloria's work. If anything, I'd love you to read a white paper by her that she wrote, short read, but really kind of a wonderful thing called Why Don't We Just Weigh Them, which has a really, really interesting title. But where Gloria was going with this whole thing is kind of where my slide will start here. I'm going to do a little level setting for about 15, 20 minutes or so here with some concepts. Then we'll open it up to a general QA in about 20 minutes or so. But I did want to level set in the discipline for those of you who may be new to the idea. But it kind of speaks to this slide. This is a current slide on research of what the impact of learning. And like I said, for the first 25 years of my professional life, I was what I would call a learning professional. I ran large training organizations from Microsoft to vendors to consulted for a bit. And to be very candid on this call, I sort of had reached a impasse about 6 years ago because, frankly, as I say, I got sick of being the whipping boy for learning, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is that you know, I really had done everything imaginable to learning. I had taught it, e-learninged it, virtualized it, podcast it, vodcast it, MP3'd it. I mean, you guys, you name it, I had done to it. And my anxiousness was that even after all that good work, and I hoped it was good work, I still would get some very interesting responses 3 to 4 months or so after when learning had occurred. Let me show you some of the reality of what we're up against today. These are some research about how learning is going from an end-user perspective. And get this, 32% of executives think their company's training programs are extremely or very effective in preparing employees, but meaning obviously 68% feel that they may fall short. 90% of all learning is forgotten up to 30 days after training, depending on availability and practice and such. Searching is the trend, right? People are Googling themselves to death. but interesting how it's impacted the workforce, let alone the Google you and I think of when we try to find things personally or outside of work. 8.8 hours a week, 457 hours a year, the average employee is spending searching. What this research doesn't show is that they only find what they're looking for half the time. So that's half a day a week of lost productivity. Even with all that training, 76% of a failed or a substandard understanding of mission-critical applications, and then it all comes down to adoption. Nearly 50% of companies are not achieving effective levels of adoption or user rates with systems or training. And guys, I don't mean this to be a depressing slide, particularly for my learning professional friends who might be on this call, because I do think we've done good work. But the question here becomes, are these really training problems? You know, but here, you know, this always comes back on training. At least it did on me. You know, when the people who pay for this or who charge learning people to do what we do, when they get these results, they instinctively, I think, go back on training and say, well, you know what, training must have been bad. I would argue that these are not training problems. And I would argue that these are performance problems. And I'm not just playing with words there, folks. Training is training. We'll talk about it in a moment. It does what it does, I think, exceptionally well. The problem is training is not performance. It aids performance, clearly. It impacts performance, clearly. It influences performance. But it is not, in the context of work, training alone is not a performance enabler. And so what I think this chart talks to, and the challenge that's in front of all of us, is how do we extend training is the moral of the story here, guys. How do we training, let's let training do what it does great. But let's stop looking at it as the problem. And 6 years ago, I did. I often tell my friends I got out of the training business, candidly. And I got into the performance support business because I felt that I had spent enough time on that side of the journey. I thought it's done very well, but something was still missing in the way we were getting the kind of perfective expectation and performance we wish. So here's an interesting chart. Look across the top here. You see concepts mastered. This is really the journey our learners are on. They have to learn stuff. They have to have a mastery level of concepts and tasks. Then, of course, they have to apply it, right? They have to make on-the-job competency their goal. But look over here to the right. I don't know any organization in today's world that does not live in a constant state of change. I have a dear friend who would argue that, frankly, the shelf life of training is almost minimal because of, not because, again, training's bad, but because its ability to keep up with the world we live in from a training alone perspective is almost, in some organizations, some industries, medical, we hear a lot of, it might be, frankly, impossible. So what should our approach be? Well, here's training, guys. See the red? And its job is to take people from little knowledge to a lot. The danger is this. When people move to transfer, you saw this in this chart a moment ago, up to 90% of information is lost over time. 30 days tends to be the rationale here. So even with the best of efforts, we get this attrition, right? And here's the problem. In most organizations, this journey then to competency is left to chance. People, we give them stuff. They've got a book from class. They've got e-learning on an LMS. They may have a coaching program, all kinds of stuff. But the reality is the green, by design, is not as intentional as the red, right? And then even if we get them competent, here's the challenge, right? How do they remain and sustain their improvement to be better? So guys, here's the problem. In the world I used to come from, is I only worried about the red. I was in the training L&D business. And what I noticed when I first saw this chart is, holy cow, I'm ignoring two critical, ignoring is the wrong word, I'm not impacting two critical stages that actually help training do and achieve what it's meant to do. So here's this world of performance support, guys. This is the new, it's what we're here today to talk about. But notice it is in complement to the journey. It is not in place of. It's a discipline that we can add to instruction that helps take what is learned, intentionally give them a transfer strategy, and help with sustain. So here's what we have found happens. This is the exciting part of this chart. Is notice what happens when performance support is added. We've seen two very powerful things happen in support of training. Number one, we've seen time to competency and transfer reduced by up to 50%. And guys, it's just because there's an intentionality to it. It's not haphazard anymore. Just like they were taught to learn intentionally, we are now going to teach them to support themselves intentionally. And notice training is also reduced because of it. You frankly don't have to teach as much, guys. When you have performance support, the emphasis we've always put on content and the mastery of that content, frankly, becomes less. In fact, the classroom becomes two pretty exciting things. It becomes a place where people learn reference-based critical skills, critical thinking skills, because we've enabled them with this intentional performance support infrastructure to go beyond the classroom, and therefore we just don't need to teach all we used to. And what I love about this is it frees the classroom to do what it does best. The classroom is a stunning learning modality that I would argue for too long has been improperly used. It's been a place where we've come, candidly, to cover content because it's the only shot we get. But in this model, the point is, because we have and are going to send them off with an intentional performance support framework or approach, the classroom no longer has to be the place that owns all that content, that owns all that learning. It becomes instead a place where we use it for experiential learning, for problem solving, for critical skills thinking. We still teach stuff, but only foundational, because the learner can and is taught how to get the rest. And we really get this continuous improvement sustainment model. Now, what is it then? Let's talk about a definition. Performance support makes employees proficient and self-sufficient with predictive support that is seamlessly embedded within the employee's workflow, assisting them on demand at the moment of need. Again, you'll get these slides, by the way, and this is being recorded, but notice there are some words that are bolded. There's some really key concepts here, right? Proficient and self-sufficient are two important words. Proficient means a learner can do things on their own, the self-sufficient side. They learn to stand self-reliant. Predictive support, it obviously means it's not haphazard anymore. It is a user experience and a framework that the learners become familiar with, they master, they become competent with over time, they rely on over time. And notice the embeddedness, key part of performance support, and why a lot of what organizations now may call performance support tends not to be. Embeddedness is everything, and we'll talk about that when we show an example here in just a bit. On-demand moment of need. So,
Bob, we have a question. This coming from Natalie, if this is the appropriate time. Performance support has been around as a discipline since the early 80s. Why is this gaining traction now?
Good question. Well, mainly a couple things. You know, the moons are aligning, right? I think the technology to do it, Natalie, is in a place it's not been before. Our ability to author it, in the early 80s when Gloria first thought of it, you guys, two things were, there were two problems with it. Number one, the tools to build it were very, very expensive and cumbersome. You literally had to have a programming background to write it. I think secondly, the other thing that has changed is the demand on learning and the economics of learning have changed. You know, I first came out with, I didn't first come out with this, but I tried to get people, John, to talk about this 6 years ago. Now, if you do the math, that predates, at least in the States, the infamous 2008 modern depression, or recession as we call it over here, right? Nobody wanted to talk about this because training was a very different beast back then. It had huge budgets. We built brick and mortar classrooms. We had corporate universities rising in all over the place, and so frankly, and people were allowed to go to class. They had time to go. The shelf life of content had some degree of shelf life, so therefore learners could, you know, depend on training to sustain them longer than today. So I think it's really come back in its own. I just had a talk to you guys before I got on this call with an organization, a pharmaceutical here in the States, and the words the learning director there literally said is, Bob, I know you've been talking to me about this for years, but the timing is finally right. The way we look at learning, the demands on our learner, the currency of content is at a place that it's never been before, so it's time. Is that helping, John?
Yeah, awesome.
Good. So keep the questions coming, by the way. By all means, please continue to interrupt. So here, what I want to talk about then before I show you an example is I keep talking about this word intentional. I keep talking about the fact that we're going to make the predictive support, right? So where I'm going with this, you guys, is if performance support is going to work and we're going to rely on it as we have classroom. If we're going to cut classroom in half, those are some strong words. So my point is, if I'm going to do that, this whole world of performance support better be scalable. It better be systemic. These are some, strong words. It better be reliable. So where I'm going with this is there is a design methodology, guys, for performance support like there is for learning. So we use this pyramid metaphor. And basically what it implies is we put people into performance support at a moment of need. You heard me use that earlier. We'll talk more about that in a minute. That's the top of this pyramid. We enter through the point. In other words, the learner is at a point where they need support, either to learn more, to review, to remediate, right? So they come in through the problem. We have to better understand those problems, and we have to give them entry points to those problems. We tend to call those processes in our work. The workflow process. We have to understand, in other words, you guys, the context with which the learner wants to and will enter these problems. Then we give them steps. See the next level? We give them the quick, in this, step 1, step 2, step 3. If those are not enough, notice what happens in the pyramid, though. There's these concepts. There's the underlying, well, then why am I doing this? Maybe I don't get it because I don't understand it. Those are two very different things, right? And notice over here on the right, 2 clicks, 10 seconds. That's that accessibility. You'll see in a moment when I show an example, we really got to make these things accessible quickly. That's that embeddedness you heard me talk about earlier, or people do not consume. So but a lot of people say, Bob, this is kind of help, right? This is kind of what help was like. Well, notice these next layers, you guys. It gets much richer here because we live in a world, John, this also kind of speaks to Natalie's question. The other reason the time is right now is we have an abundance of resources like we've never had before. SharePoint, Yammer, Facebook, intranet sites, LMSs, LCMSs, CMS. I mean, if you've heard all these acronyms before, we have intranet sites. We have so many resources. In fact, what I think many learners would argue is we have way too many resources. It's not an issue of content anymore. It's an issue of accessibility, right? So notice this bottom layer. This is what we call brokering. You see it over here on the right, which means that even after steps and concepts, we're going to then, depending on the problem, give you access to a whole host of rich resources that will hopefully make the journey to the answer easier. Now notice the pyramid implies some things, guys. It implies the farther down you get, the broader the level, meaning the more involved, the more complex. So the point here is you want to get learners back to work. So the idea of bringing them in through this point and giving them steps and concepts first is to say, look, here's the quick and dirty. Get back, if this is enough, go back to work. But sometimes it's not, and often it's not. So then we give access to these resources all based on the problem. So let me do a quick demonstration, if I may. So John, could you let me know if you are seeing my screen here?
Yep, so far so good.
Are you seeing a dashboard here? Or?
I see Salesforce Performance Support by Ontuitive.
Awesome. So here's what we did, you guys. This is the example I want to show. This was for a large insurance company here in the States. And what they were struggling with, they had bought Salesforce.com. You may know of this. This is a large, what they call CRM software package. They had bought it for all of their sales reps. Their concern was twofold. Number one, of course, they were afraid, they were concerned, IT was concerned the system would not be adopted. That's classic concern when any system is purchased, right? So obviously their thought was, well, we'll just do system training. We'll teach them the software. Well, guess what? Another stakeholder was the SVP of sales, Senior Vice President of Sales. He, frankly, guys, was not concerned at all. Well, that's wrong. He wasn't primarily concerned with the adoption of Salesforce. He was concerned with whether Salesforce would help his salespeople sell better. And frankly, his concern was, if it doesn't, I don't want it. I don't need another system. And frankly, if this Salesforce thing is going to take an hour or more a day of my sales rep's time, why would I do that? I mean, an hour of their day is an hour they can't sell. So by his charge, we built the performance support you're about to see. And we typically build performance support. We see it in two worlds, you guys. We see it in what we call the workflow level. This is an icon. I didn't actually launch it for you on the screen, but this is an icon that sits on the sales rep's desk. notice at the bottom here, this is the sales process for that organization that they follow. This is what the SVP of sales hoped the reps would follow and that Salesforce would help enable. But notice I'm not in Salesforce yet. I'm getting help on the selling process. So if I click on prospecting here, and again, this isn't necessarily right or wrong. This is their selling process. So there's one click, right? So here I am now into the prospect phase. Here are all the things my SVP of sales wants me to do. So let's say I'm going to determine a lead. So in 2 clicks, you guys, I'm now at the lead qualification criteria. Here are the things, the steps, if you will. Think of the pyramid that SVP of sales wants me to follow. Notice these are not Salesforce things, right? These are things that the SVP of sales wants the sales rep to follow, including, if you look down here at the bottom, here's all the supporting resources. Think about the pyramid, right? This was taught in class as a part of the course. All of Salesforce was not taught because it can be referenced here. But notice if I have to do this develop a TAS plan thing. If I click on that, what I want to show you here is this is Excel. This is Word. This is a Word document that the SVP of sales wants the salespeople filling out. Notice this is before I'm anywhere near Salesforce. This is called a TAS plan. Here are the steps. Think of the pyramid. Here are the deeper details. So I can see screenshots of filling out that particular document. Go back to the steps. Here's more information I get. Think about the pyramid, right? There's this business calculator they want them to use. It's another spreadsheet. Here's the concepts of understanding what a TAS plan is. How do I define these different aspects? I won't go into all of them for you. But notice these resources used to be in binders, in books, all over the place. And this document itself, this TAS plan, gets updated all the time. So it was kept on a content server. But notice what happens now. If I click on this Do It button, what that actually does, you guys, is it launches this help on top, how to complete a TAS plan. And it launches the TAS plan document from the content repository. And here are the steps. And I literally, this is a live document. I can fill it out by following these steps over here. So again, the point, guys, here is the days of teaching the TAS plan in class, the days of teaching all the clicks, they don't do it anymore. Because of 2 things. They'll forget. Secondly, the TAS plan changes a lot. So conceptually, the reps know what a TAS plan is. They understand they have to fill it out. This gives them the point of need help that they need to do it effectively. Now, let me go back to my performance support. So remember, that was doing the TAS plan, right? Part of that lead, qualifying was eventually I get to Salesforce. So remember, we see 2 kinds of performance support. One is this workflow performance support that can support onboarding, leadership training, management, competency modeling, talent management. We've seen performance support, you guys, in all of those areas because they have workflows to follow and processes and steps to be done. We also obviously see it in software. So notice down here, I have to convert the lead in Salesforce eventually. So I fill out my TAS plan, and here I am. This is, if it looks familiar, here's the steps, here's the details. I won't do all those. Notice there's a new tab now called Show Me. Show Me actually launches off of a LMS tutorial on, notice, how to convert leads. It didn't take me to the LMS and drop me at the doorstep. I didn't have to find the course. It literally, if you think of the pyramid, it funnels to me. It funnels to me a series of resources that are specifically relevant to the problem that I'm trying to solve. So let me go in from here to software. Now notice down here, if necessary, now you go to the leads page in Salesforce. So I click on that. This is, again, being launched by the performance support. What it does now is, get in there, it launches the software for me. Notice this little help window that appeared, you guys. This is very different than the help earlier because this is going to now guide me through the software. Notice when I enter, it doesn't just drop me in the home page of Salesforce. I was converting a lead. It takes me directly to the lead tab. And watch what happens to this window here. To This is what we call a ready or smart window. See how it followed me into the leads menu? And it's only giving me tasks, overviews, processes for dealing with a lead. If I jump to the accounts page, and this is off script, but I want to do account stuff, notice over here on the right, my ready window, smart window, refeeds to me now the tasks, the workflow, the overview of how to deal with accounts. So if I go back into leads, real quickly, I'll kind of wrap up here because you kind of get the idea. If I go into Gary, let's say I'm going to actually convert the lead. So I click on that. Notice the tabs, here's the tabs again. Same thing, process details show me. If I go into Gary Player here to convert this lead, and I won't bore you with the steps, but over here, I'm being guided with those. If I click on convert, watch what else performance support can do. I go into the actual field where I'm supposed to fill out the lead and convert, right? But watch what happens up here in the ready window. Not only can performance support you guys guide me at the process layer, at the step layer, that's what you've seen so far, it can also watch me. It can watch my behavior. So notice down here in the opportunities field, I've typed in Gary's company name, Professional Golf Association. But up here it says, wait, no. When you fill out Salesforce for this company, we need you to use this protocol. So where I'm going with this, you guys, is this can follow business rules. So performance support can help me with the workflow. It can help me with the tasks and related resources that I need to perform something. It can also watch my behavior and remediate and guide me if I do something wrong, proactively. Very, very different. You can even follow me across applications, because let's say one of the things I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to go and schedule a meeting once that Salesforce lead is completed. Well, what it can do is it can actually go over and guide me through filling out things that might be done in other applications. So if I move over to Outlook, notice my ready window now jumps over and says, okay, look, well, you've left Salesforce. You're in a different software. I'm going to help you now in calendars. So and guys, what I wanted to show you all of this for is I want you to think about, again, this is all about the impact on training and why training becomes such a different experience. If I have this level of guiding, all this stuff doesn't have to be taught. All the click-throughs, all the menus, all the fields, because I can get support on them if or when they change or I need them. But class can become, for this organization, you guys, it became, why is Salesforce effective? What is the sales process here? How do we follow it correctly? What if we do it wrong? What is a TAS plan? Originally, they were just going to do 5 days of Salesforce training, end-to-end, how to click, how to menu, the whole deal. But as you see, what enabling performance support in that conversation let us do was it let us change the training from one of just content memorization and follow-along to a place where the richer part of learning, the understanding, the concepts, the workflow could be taught and, again, understood. So
Bob, we have another question.
Yeah.
You got time?
Yeah, please.
So earlier you were talking about train, transfer, sustain,
yep.
and now you've been talking about performance support. So how does this fit in with what we've been talking about, blended learning, for years?
Perfect. Great question. Yeah, it basically is an enabler of all that, John. It spans all of those. Train, transfer, sustain is the journey. Now, in the old days of blended learning, for those on the phone who remember those days or the term, what we found when you looked at it closely was how this is different is what we really did was we just blended training. We took, see if it sounds familiar, we took like a 5-day course, let's say, and we made it 3. And then we put e-learning on either end. We may put some reading to do or some. But if you think about it, that really isn't going into transfer and sustain. It really was just mixing up training in a different way. Performance support goes beyond, and by the way, that's still a very wonderful model, and that's a very economic, effective model for blending training. But blended learning is really taking what's learned in training and extending it out into transfer and sustain. So the blended learning of the millennium, if you will, is bringing performance support in concert with training. So training can be effective, shorter, purposeful, interactive, collaborative, all the things that getting people together, does so wonderfully. And the actual transfer of learning, performance support picks up and carries on into sustain. Super question. So just real quick, this is how the pyramid was obviously enabled. We use this metaphor of tabs. The learner never really sees the pyramid, you guys, in the real world. That's a design metaphor for us as training folks. But once the learner masters these tabs, and you saw they change depending on context. Some of the screens had more tabs than others. We help determine that in our design. The learner becomes very, very proficient with navigating this world, as long as it remains consistent. And then, again, that allows and frees training to be something very different than it's been. So questions or other comments?
We do have one more question, Bob, which is you've kind of hinted at what are the benefits to the learner in the organization who include performance support in their overall training solution?
Well, I think the first thing is we've seen stunning things, John, with just the change in performance. I mean, the analytics out of the measurement, ROI, that word's been around our industry for years, out of a full learning solution that spans performance support have been unbelievable. We've seen, the example I just showed you, to give you some metrics, they had 84% adoption of that system. Way above, by the way, the national average for adopting Salesforce. They got over $500,000 back in training dollars and productivity time based on this new blended approach and simply the amount of time people had to or did not have to attend training. They also tracked the degree to which help desk calls were followed, reduced by half. The degree to which people bothered others because they just, that's what people do, right? We find someone else who knows stuff we don't. That was reduced by, considerably. So first and foremost, the benefit is a much higher and defendable transfer from learning to performance. The other side of it is just the economics. I think it's the in the currency of content. Like I said earlier, I think the biggest frustration for training alone nowadays is keeping up and presenting an economic model that in today's world works. Well, with performance support, you get both. You get the ability to keep content current as it moves into the workflow. That changes the degree to which you have to emphasize it in training. And secondly, the economic model of the degree to which and the time with which we have to keep people in training is dramatically different. Excellent question.
Great. All right, we have another question from Frank. So this approach only works with automated process platforms? Question. What if we don't have process management tools in place? Can we still benefit?
Absolutely, yeah, you can. Because what we find, you guys, is that it's not just process. It can be, there are three things that drive performance support as we find role-based things that people do based on who they are. Circumstance-based. So people may not, call centers do this a lot. Call centers don't necessarily follow a process. They're driven more by a circumstance, right? Someone calls with a specific problem, and then the call center person has to answer it. See, that's not a step in a workflow. That's an instance that arises. So we have built performance support based on that. The other area is soft skills, as we've called them, right? Leadership, competencies, talent management. We have, again, those are often more circumstance-based, based on coaching a high potential employee or onboarding someone to an organization. We have seen performance support there as well. Any place, you guys, there's content. I know this is an awful broad statement, but if you have content to be learned, applied, and remembered, performance support can live in that world.
Great.
Great
And we
question.
got a good follow-on question from Sharon. Is there a specific technology that makes the process of creating performance support not too time-consuming? And
Yeah.
if I could add an
Yeah.
editorial, I would assume that means not too expensive as well.
Yeah, it does, John. Yeah, and that's again, you asked earlier about the difference between why now, remember, compared to the Gloria days. Yeah, the tool you saw on the line here and the one that we partner with you folks, you wonderful folks there at BWise and others, is we use a technology called Learning Guide Manager. It's what authored what you saw. And being someone who followed Gloria in the early years and tried to do what she did and frankly became overwhelmed by the tools and the technology and the price, to be honest, all those things have changed. If you're a typical ID, these tools are like authoring in Word. And so that's something we could maybe demo at another time as a follow-on, or we can talk more about it in Toronto when I'm up there later. But I think that's another reason why the timing is finally here. The authoring environments to do these, you guys, are as common and learnable and maintainable, big word, as the Authorware, the Captiva, Captivate, that most of us have, and PowerPoint, frankly, that most of us have learned on the training side.
Fantastic. Just one more minute. We'll see if there's any more questions that come up, but at the moment not. Thanks, Bob. It's certainly, from my perspective, really interesting, and once again, I would encourage anybody who has the time or ability to pop up to Toronto, if you're not already here, on the 18th of October. Bob's put a little bit of information out there, but feel free to get a hold of us. Hit our website. You'll find information about that session, and I think Bob will have a little more time to go into more detail about performance support, in particular, examples and how it can benefit and how it can be implemented. So.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Oh, I've got another question.
Great.
Hold on, one more time. Let's see. So back to Frank, which is great. Keep the dialogue going. If we do have automated tools, can we use web service APIs to get to your system?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, and that's what's exciting. Again, it's this whole alignment of technologies, right? The examples that you saw are web-based tools, and they hook very well into web-based technologies. And then you get all the wonderful things of analytics and stuff that follow and can watch those behaviors. But I think, again, Frank, that's been the tipping point, right? I mean, in the early days when this tried to launch, there was desktop stuff, and frankly, who remembers this? DOS-based stuff. John, that's dating you and I. And we tried to play with XML, if you know the acronym, and reusable learning objects, if you remember all these words. Yep, these technologies have finally come of age, and web access and going into cloud. Cloud's coming next year, you guys, in a big way. These have freed these technologies and made performance support more embedded in ways we couldn't before. Great question.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, one of the things, Bob, this is coming from me. I am excited about the learning environment right now because, for me, what I finally see when you talked about, this is the time and why this is the time. We have an ability to deliver content to learners in a format that makes sense to them based on their role, their physical location, what they're trying to do, and their learning preference, which has always been a bit of a struggle for those of us who have been in the learning business. Can you comment on that and how you see performance support helping that?
Well, I mentioned the acronym earlier, John, but what XML is, and I don't want to go into that. I can talk a lot more about this when I'm there in Toronto later. But XML, if you know the acronym, is what's really making this possible. It's all those things you gave are filters. We're able to make content. In the early days, I just wrote content and put it in a book, right? And I tried to put it in a linear fashion that made class make sense, and people took it home. E-learning came along. We kind of did the same thing. We put content in a digital environment, typically linear, because it's good learning. We put it on an LMS so it's searchable. All this good stuff. Well, we now have all these wonderful assets, but the tipping point has been accessibility, context, chunking, right? So XML has come along, and these authoring environments that was asked about earlier have gotten to a point where we can make all those variables very powerfully linked to very small pieces of content. So I can make an FAQ relevant to the job role, the circumstance, the workflow. And so when I then use these tools to put people in those circumstances, you saw how the content was dynamically changing in Salesforce as I went from lead to contact to convert. That was this XML in the background with all the tagging it's doing to the different kinds of content, serving it up to me in the way that a learner needs in that context. This is the game changer. That it's been around for years, but these authoring environments and our ability to contextualize them in the pyramid I gave earlier has really not come of age until lately. And guys, wait till you see where it's going to go. I mean, we're going to watch learners in ways we haven't before. We're going to make this content more dynamic than ever. We're going to, and we'll talk more about it in Toronto, but there's just some really exciting stuff on the horizon that helps us as learning folks make this more incredible and powerful than ever.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bob, for your comments. I mean, for me, part of it's like redemption, I guess. I remember doing a presentation at an Elliott Mazie conference in, I don't know, probably 94, and my topic was JIT and JET, just in time and just enough training. And it was well received, except about 5 people tried to lynch me afterwards because they loved the concept, but said, you know, the tools don't exist. How do you do it? And I said, be patient. You know, every year for the last 5 years has been the year of the network. And the technologies are coming. I just didn't know they'd take 20 years.
Well,
it's great to
exciting.
see.
It is.
Fantastic. Well, unless there aren't any other questions, which I don't see at the moment, we'll wrap things up from there. Once again, Bob is going to be in Toronto on the 18th of October. Please sign up for that. And there's a logo or an image of his book. And if I'm not mistaken, Bob, you'll be doing a book signing there at the same time. So
I will be.
In addition to getting lots more content and interesting dialogue with Bob, you'll be able to get a copy of that book. So it will be well worth attending, I'm sure. And thanks again, Bob. Fantastic presentation as always. I know I learned a lot. I suspect everyone else did too. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
You as well, folks. Thanks for attending. Hope to see you in Toronto. Thanks.